Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webcast. How do we reach and finance the savings from deep building energy retrofits? My name is Clay Nestler, and I'm the global lead for buildings and energy at the World Resources Institute, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session. We'll start this webcast with a few housekeeping announcements and then quickly move on to our speakers, followed by some time for Q&A. As a reminder, your screen is customizable utilizing the various widgets found on the bottom of your screen. You should all be experts now after a day and a half of the conference. Presentations can be downloaded as PDFs from the resource list in the menu. Attendees are in listen-only mode, but can submit questions through the Q&A box anytime during the webcast. If you hear something interesting or a question crosses your mind, please put it in the Q&A box. We will either get to it at the end of the session, or we can discuss that question in the Zoom breakout session afterwards. The Zoom discussion rooms will be open at the end of the webcast, and just click on the Zoom widget on the bottom menu or download the daily Zoom link PDF available in the Engagement Hub. Please be sure to complete the evaluation form after your last webcast and receive a $25 credit towards the 2022 Finance Forum event. Your feedback helps ACEEE planning for future finance forums. Lastly, we want to thank our sponsors and partners for their support of the Finance Forum. Before we get started and before I introduce our distinguished speakers, we wanted to do a little poll, kind of gauge the audience here. So if we could see the first poll question. What is your definition of a deep retrofit? Please choose one response, and we will show the results shortly. All right, so, well, that's good news. No one said less than 10%. Greater than 20, 18%, greater than 30, 36, greater than 40, 18%, and, you know, almost 30% of you said greater than 50. Well, that is certainly ambitious and aspirational, but that's great. That gives us a sense of kind of where folks are at here. And a couple of the speakers are going to talk about how they define deep energy retrofits. Let's go to poll question number 2. What's the greatest barrier to investing in deep retrofits today? All right, what are the poll results? Okay. High upfront costs. Number 1, a third said that. Long payback periods, 18%. And then significantly lower or lack of financial incentives, inability to monetize non-energy benefits, lack of financial models. I'm kind of surprised by that, only 3%. All right. I think we've heard a lot of discussion in the last 2 days about financial models and PACE and energy efficiency as a service. So those are kind of surprising results. I'm glad we're having this webinar. All right, then. Thank you. Now let's move on to our speakers. We have a distinguished panel of speakers today. I'm going to just mention their names now, and then I will give them a longer introduction before their presentation. We have James Gepner from NYSERDA's Retrofit New York program, Kinga Porst-Hydras from the U.S. General Services Administration, and Alex Hill from Dunsky Energy Consulting. Our first speaker is James Gepner. James Following his many years in project finance, he evaluated companies in a number of different markets, served as advisor to startups and new initiatives, relying on behavioral science, finance, and competitive theory to see what's shaping a market. With a desire to focus more on the climate, he founded erase40.org to speed the adoption of zero energy buildings. Thank you for that, James. Recently, James joins NYSERDA's Retrofit New York team in New York City and is focused on the mechanisms that will make for a robust zero energy retrofit market. He's a graduate of NYU and of SGIB's investment banking program. James, over to you.
Thank you, Clay. So again, I'm with the Retrofit New York team at NYSERDA, and there's a sort of a long period of time, so I'll just dive right in. So I'd like to go over our approach to the market and discuss some of the questions that we ask ourselves on the Retrofit New York team. Basically, what makes this market viable, or what will make it viable? Meaning, how can we basically scale what is currently a very small and idiosyncratic market? What's broken, and what mechanisms do we need to fix it? So imagine basically right now that you're looking at a product one sheet or one pager, just like you'd see for any product, from a car to a yo-yo. This is the pre-retrofit stage of the product, and then you'd see a post-retrofit stage with known outcomes and known prices. The information about the construction period, about, again, the post-retrofit energy usage, certain operational costs, some of your risks and how that varies from a conventional building, and then information about the long-term warranty, so that when you see this sheet, you know that if you have, in this case, a 2 to 3 story wood frame building of this vintage, then you have a building that can be retrofitted with this product, and you know exactly what that will mean to you. So we believe this is one of the necessary ingredients to scale. Basically moving away from a service model, which involves a ton of uncertainty, towards a product model where you can hand a building owner, long in advance of any money out the door, their post-retrofit outcomes. And again, if you basically without a long period of price discovery, there's an easy adoption period, and it's a less costly process at the beginning. If I pick up a friend's iPhone, and I've never seen an iPhone before, and I start to play with the interface, when I go to the store, I expect the interface capabilities to be the same in the iPhone I pick up at the store. And that's really what's required here for adoption to be possible at scale level. What we want is a product with known outcomes. So the building owner knows exactly what they're buying, and so lenders and others know exactly what they're financing. And why is this the case? Because, here's the challenge. We have about roughly this many days until January 1st, 2050. And this is the number of retrofits we need per hour, based on the statistic and estimate that 75% of existing buildings will remain in our building stock until 2050. So if we want to hit our zero energy goals, this is what we need to do. So only in our minds with a product approach will we be able to basically deploy the amount of capital needed to address the scale that's required to solve this problem. I keep starting to say, next slide, please, but I realize I'm actually the person changing the slides. So how do we deliver this level of scale? What kind of company is capable of delivering this kind of scale? Well, for a variety of reasons, which I'll briefly cover some of them. We have a zero energy company that sits on top of the value chain, interacts directly with the building owner. There's no intermediary. A company that delivers a turnkey whole building retrofit solution, again, directly to that building owner. That solution potentially coming with a service contract and with a long-term warranty. So there's not uncertainty about different operational costs, longevity, and so forth. So if we think about what's going to make this market self-sustaining, we need to ask certain questions like, again, what can deliver a scalable solution? What's going to make a business viable? What type of entity is investable that it can design a product? It's not waiting for a project to come along, but it can design a product that is applicable to buildings of a similar topology. what will make a company that is more competitive than a conventional provider, because unless it's more competitive, then the costs are always going to be in the favor of the conventional upgrade. And where are there areas of real competitive and decisive advantage? So the reason we end up at this model, partially at least, is because when we look at some of the cost structures, here's what we see. We see lots of uncertainty driven by high transaction costs, inventory costs, a number of profit takers in this very, very long value chain, markups from distributors, subcontractors, again, lots of uncertainty, so a lot of inefficiencies on site and so forth. So this is the status quo, and this is both a problem and an advantage. It means with an offsite produced product that there can be basically an extreme cost advantage that providers that do not have that much influence over the value chain can provide. So again, the advantage of the company. How do we get basically a company with significant advantages? Well, a company that is delivering a product is not trying to win a project, as this market is currently oriented to. It's to win a market. It's to say, what is my potential market for this typology across these climate zones, and to try to win, a certain percentage of that potential market. So spending the money to develop, again, a product that goes across that typology, and then pursue those customers, not waiting for them, going into whatever is anticipating the refi schedules or the major events and approaching them with your product. The other thing about a company that sits on top of the value chain is it is investable. And that's really very different than what we have in the status quo case, where manufacturers, the BASFs, the Dows, the Mitsubishis, all sit in the bottom of the value chain and, again, sell their manufactured goods up through a very long value chain where a lot of people add markups. And there are very few companies that can actually attract a lot of equity capital on the top of the value chain. So by having a company that's investable, again, you get some equity to have a company go through its ramp period, a company that can invest in necessary technologies, design products, basically develop the customer acquisition capabilities, and so forth. And again, there are advantages to being able to go direct to customer and tying your fate to theirs. If you deliver a high quality product, then you should be rewarded for such. So basically, by having a company at the top of the value chain, you basically get a company that can start to control the structure of that value chain. Or I shouldn't say control the structure of the value chain. I should really say influence the structure of that value chain. So again, the competitiveness of this type of company is really key. What will give it decisive advantages? Because in these advantages, basically you get adoption of their product, right? So what will give this company advantages? This is really a question, about the viability over the long term. Will it be self-sustaining without project level subsidies, say, in 7 years or so? And what will those advantages be? So this is really, in my view, needs to be a focus. What will help the company through the 3-year ramp period, and at the end of that ramp period, allow it to deliver a product that is substantially competitive against conventional upgrades. So subsidizing demonstration projects so they have that product one sheet available for building owners, like in the first slide, improving unit economics by investing in necessary technologies, and for government offices like NYSERDA or DOE to continually invest in R&D or help with product design, or seek these companies or get these companies to sign long-term contracts with OEM manufacturers, or provide P&E grants in order for them to make those investments, and then help to lower customer acquisition costs and transaction costs through remote customer acquisition or early pipeline development. And then lastly, help develop a long-term warranty, so the building owner doesn't feel like they're taking on technology risk. So one thing that's important, I think, how you see a zero energy building really depends where you come from. If you come from the policy space, then these buildings are talked about as basically as though they're a conventional building with one additional feature with some energy savings. And then there's a little bit of head scratching around the other attributes of it. But we really need to look at it like we'd look at a factory that we were going to finance. When you look at a factory, you're just like, okay, there aren't precedents here, or there are very few. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? How much of that is cash? What are the risks? What are the outcomes? And so a zero energy building, we just need to look at it from scratch in the same way we're financing a factory. What are the inputs? Obviously, the energy inputs are different. Obviously, some of the material inputs are different. And what are the outputs? Obviously, there's lots of conversation about what cash this is outputting, but it's outputting, obviously, lower legislative risk because of potential carbon legislation. It's outputting higher air quality, potentially lower flood risk, lower fire risk because of a lack of internal combustion in the building. So basically, a zero energy building is not a conventional building with one new feature, lower energy costs. It's a different thing entirely, and it's just not about energy. So how do we get full value? Because, basically a question that I would throw out there is, can we name a new market that really kicked off, our new product that took over a market that had substantially discounted the value of some of its major attributes? And I mean, maybe there is one, but, nothing comes to mind. So for risk reduction, building failure risk, carbon penalty risk, increased longevity of asset, there's more cash flows available here. Increased tenant ability to pay. This might seem like a small point, but I think over a large portfolio is what we'll see, because the tenant has lower energy costs and potentially a lower health burden, lower operational costs from like maintenance labor, pest control, insurance costs, and so forth. So basically, how do we start to value those things? And I think Clay's question at the beginning about valuing those attributes is really key. So, the building owner decision, I think if we focus on the building owner decision, a single building owner decision, we start to get a picture here. So, obviously this is a representation. The simplification leaves out lots of details, intentionally so we can get a sort of crisp picture. But, what is their perceived value cost ratio? I think that's an area where it's going to be an easier win because of air quality, because of the things I just discussed. And so on the other side, upfront capital requirements. Obviously, low upfront capital requirements dominate high capital requirements. So how can we get to parity for the upfront capital requirements on the equity side for the building owner that the building owner would have for a conventional upgrade? So I don't think it's actually about cost. I think it's about upfront capital requirements. And I think cost is actually, in an important sense, although I'm about to sort of caveat this, is the wrong place to focus. So how do we lower upfront capital costs? What are the factors driving upfront capital costs? Well, of course, product cost, right? If we improve unit economics, it's going to be an easier proposition. Higher debt levels through a warranty, for instance, that actually said, okay, we're going to get 30 years of cash flows out of this building as a result of this retrofit. Or we know, because we have an ESCO contract, what the operational costs are going to be. And also because of the reduced risk over a conventional building. Lastly, contracts that bring cash to the deal through like an ESCO or a service contract. So all these things are to basically get those upfront capital requirements down to parity with a conventional upgrade. So in terms of financing, there's a lot of things that I like here. A zero energy REIT, which I'll discuss in a second. But all these things are basically to start to monetize the value of these buildings. And I'll have a little bit more of a picture here in this next slide. So this is a map of, at the project level of capital flows into a project. So the blue boxes are different points of entry for capital. And I'd like to just focus for a minute on just three of them. First, the zero energy REIT, which is where the arrow focuses, the red arrow focuses. Now, zero energy REITs are obviously effective ways to connect real estate finance to the public capital market. So why wouldn't we do the same here? If we have a productized approach that's delivering efficiency at the level of, say, 50 to 60% energy savings, has a known longevity, has decreased risk on some of the operational performance, less uncertainty all around the project, Why couldn't that productize those product features make it, or basically facilitate REIT financing? So I think this would be a great instrument to introduce in the market. And I think there are several advantages of doing so. Basically, lowering customer acquisition costs and bringing more capital into this market, obviously. The second one is service contracts or ESCOs. Obviously, there's a lot of information about that, but I'd like to sort of go beyond energy into HVAC maintenance, pest control, maybe even insurance costs. Like, what are all those liabilities that an ESCO or ESCO type company can purchase from that building owner, so that that building owner has less uncertainty in their month-to-month payments. And then lastly, sort of very obvious one, a purchasing program in the secondary market. So Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, having a specific zero energy retrofit product purchasing program. So they're signaling to the debt market that they will purchase a certain amount of certain dollar volume of loans for zero energy retrofit products, basically loans against those buildings. So that will give lenders a cue to what the pricing, the risk profile should be on those buildings, and also show lenders that there's a market for that type of debt. I think just want to lastly summarize, our program. So standardizing some of the outcomes in the product, and by defining what that product is and what the delivery mechanism is, developing market mechanisms, starting to basically fund some pilot projects, doing some demand aggregation, and then R&D support. And that, I believe, is the end. I'm rushing to a little bit to the end because I'm worried about time. But that is my full presentation. As a last note, if there are people who are interested in having ongoing conversations about things on the finance side, here's my contact information. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. That was a great presentation, and I think a really innovative way of looking what it'll take to create true market transformation. One thing you mentioned really intrigues me. What the implication would be of a long-term warranty on the equipment. You mentioned ESCOs quite a few times, and they provide a performance guarantee like energy, but a long-term warranty on the technology could be a key enabler. What do you think? So
I'd like to see more debt go against these projects, again, just to drive down the equity requirements. And I'd also like to see what I see as a market failure, which is to properly value the quality control from offsite production. So if a factory is delivering high quality, that's going to increase the longevity of the asset, decrease your mold risk, increase the useful life, and so forth, then why aren't we pricing that? And so having a market, having a warranty basically says we can put value on this quality control, and we can bring more capital to the market by having ESCOs that want to come in, decreasing their risk, because it would, the warranty would backstop it. Lenders, it would backstop some of their risk. So I think that's really necessary. If the longevity of these assets is really a key, and a warranty is one of the things that starts to say, this is, we're going to get these cash flows. So let's actually acknowledge that fact.
That's great. It seems like you're getting pretty close to push the easy button, right? Here's your zero energy retrofit. Just push easy. Thanks a lot,
Exactly.
James. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Let's turn to our next speaker. Kinga Porst-Hydrus. It serves as a sustainability expert in the GSA Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings, with a particular focus on grid interactive efficient buildings, decarbonization, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and indoor environmental quality. Must have kept her pretty busy over the last year or so. She's been working on energy savings performance contracts in the federal government, including achieving deep energy efficiency retrofits in existing buildings. Kinga has over 25 years experience in the public and commercial building industry with extensive knowledge in high performance building practices. She has an MBA from Case Western Reserve University and a master's in engineering degree from the Technical University of Budapest. Kinga is a certified energy manager and a lead AP. Kinga, over to you.
Thank you, Clay. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Happy to be here in this great panel and kind of give a recap on what the GSA has been doing on deep energy retrofits. The General Services Administration owns and leases over 376 million square feet of space in 9,600 buildings in more than 2,200 communities nationwide. In addition to office buildings, GSA properties include land ports of entries, courthouses, laboratories, post offices, and data processing centers. The GSA, the nation's largest public real estate organization, provides workplace for more than 1.1 million federal workers, most of them working remotely these days, but the building space is managed by the Public Building Service of GSA. Approximately half of the employees are in buildings that are owned by GSA, and half of them are in a leased property. As Clay mentioned, I very much agree. Existing buildings should be our focus. There are very few new buildings that we are building, and our aging inventory will be here in the future. So the focus on really bringing these buildings up to today's standards and driving them towards net zero. It was interesting to hear people's opinion on what deep energy retrofit means. There's no strict definition. We have been hovering around 40, 50%. But I think what really matters is the intent to drive buildings towards as low energy consumption as possible. Because in some marketplaces, in some weather conditions, it might not be a financially viable solution or a technically viable solution. In our book, Deep Energy Retrofits are a whole building analysis and construction process that achieves much larger energy cost savings than a simpler energy retrofit, and it enhances the building's value. So using integrated design, looking at every single building component and how those components work together and optimize the building performance is what really matters for deep energy retrofits. On the right side of the slide, it's probably hard to read, but hopefully you can follow the link. It's 2014 RMI study, the Deep Retrofit Value Guide, that demonstrates all the benefits of a deep energy and sustainability investment. This document and this research that the RMI did has a compelling logic of how deep energy efficiency and sustainability retrofits can create value beyond the cost savings on the energy reduction. Energy efficiency projects in the US and around the world are attractive investments, but they receive far less attention and capital than they deserve. This is in part due to a narrow definition of the value that typically focuses on the saved energy cost. Investors often ignore the additional value. We are showing the opportunity to really go beyond the energy savings. We have shown, and this study showed, and the GSA has also done a study on how high-performance buildings perform over time. So we are showing increased occupant satisfaction. We show higher resiliency of the building portfolio. So if we can put value to these additional benefits, I think that will help drive deeper energy retrofits in the future and getting financing for these projects. Deep energy retrofits using integrated design are stepping stone for a successful grid interactive buildings, electrification, and decarbonization. Clay mentioned that you probably are following the new executive orders and directions coming out of the Biden administration and really pushing the federal government towards decarbonization. So energy efficiency and deep energy retrofits are really key to getting us to those goals. So this is kind of a pathway that we see how energy efficiency, electrification of the building portfolio, demand flexibility, and then adding renewable sources and battery storage will really close this gap and getting our buildings to be zero carbon in the future. The GSA's National Deep Energy Retrofit Program started about 10 years ago. And looking back into my notes, actually, exactly 10 years ago, I participated at a panel discussion at the same forum. I think it was held in Philadelphia back in 2011. And that was really when the GSA started to embark in this journey on pushing ourselves to reduce energy consumption in our buildings using energy savings performance contracts. So I'm really happy to report that the concept and the plans that I presented 10 years ago have been successful, and the GSA awarded between 2013 and today $747 million in energy savings performance contracts. But what I'm really proud of is the energy savings, the energy reduction from these projects reaches about 38% on an average, which, going back to the definition of deep energy retrofits, it's right there. We are meeting the targets, and really more importantly, this helps us drive our buildings towards net zero energy use. And we changed kind of our thinking of not eliminating long payback items just because it takes a long time to pay back, but really bundling it together with the shorter payback technologies and really looking at the buildings comprehensively and maybe downsizing equipment if it's possible, and really optimizing building performance. So this is just kind of the list of projects that were awarded. I think we are now in round 4. I will have a project sample or project example from our last round of projects, and this is not included in this slide, but the average federal ESPC energy savings performance contract come out to about 18% reduction. So we are really pushing it and almost doubling it, without using much appropriated funding in the last few years. We definitely did not have any major funding for retrofits. And then there's an interesting story there. You see a spike, 100% reduction. As I mentioned, driving to net zero, this is really the goal, but it doesn't always make sense. If you look at the location, St. Croix Island, it was actually a kind of a perfect storm with really high utility rates and land available around the building to install solar panels. So the financing really worked out. So that building actually performed at net zero using third-party financing energy savings performance contracts. Side note, Irma hit the island, and we are in the process of replacing the solar panels that got damaged in the hurricane. So the benefits of typical of deep energy retrofits beyond the typical retrofits that I call kind of like addressing low-hanging fruits and really just addressing deferred maintenance problems in the building. Deep energy retrofits that provide cost savings, energy consumption, and demand savings. And in addition to that, they improve occupant satisfaction, increase productivity, reduce downtime. We see this building increases resiliency and energy security by lowering the kWh used in the building and then having to supplement with battery storage or other backup power. And to the national grid, energy efficient buildings will mean less power generation, transmission, and distribution in the in the aging infrastructure of the national grid. So we believe this, this is a pathway for not only the GSA portfolio, but the national electric grid. One case study that I like to bring up is, actually there are two case studies, both of them are in the DC area. The New Kelton Federal Building in Maryland houses the IRS in a campus just outside of DC. It is a large building, 1.2 million square feet, but it's relatively modern, relatively new, 1994. So initially, when we looked at it as a candidate for a deep retrofit, I didn't expect the results that we were getting, reaching 60% energy and over 50% water reduction on site. And in addition to the typical energy conservation measures that we see, lighting upgrade, controls, this site, we were able to add geothermal wells under the parking area on the left side of the screen, and then added carport structures with PV panels, and then some additional solar on top of the roof. But what I think is really important to take away from this project is we were able to, so we replaced the chillers and the boilers, and running some building simulation and building calculations on the load, and then the reduced internal load because of the lighting upgrade, we were able to downsize these equipment 40%. So, but still, of course, meeting the building heating and the, cooling load. So this is what I'm talking about. This is what my definition of a deep retrofit is, doing everything at the same time and really optimizing the building equipment. Another example is that at a really large, two large facilities in Washington, D.C. that are just, construction is just starting. In these two buildings, you probably recognize the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center is the second largest building after the Pentagon, and then the new executive office building on the top was part of an ESPC project, part of the National Deep Energy Retrofit Program at GSA, and the $91 million energy savings performance contract was awarded that will achieve 42% energy reduction and about 50% water reduction in the two sites. And the Reagan building actually was already an efficient building with a lot of upgrade that happened over time. So the main component and the main energy conservation measure really in both of these sites is the building automation system modernization, going from pneumatic to DDC, and really bringing these buildings up to the 21st century. So I'm really looking forward to what these buildings will be able to do to become part of the grid in a interactive way. So I will have a slide with a lot of the resources because we collected all these best practices that we believe are applicable to anybody really engaging in deep energy retrofits and using integrated design. So I invite everybody to follow those links and read these studies. But just briefly, some of the lessons learned. Again, these are not rocket science. Just really having an aggressive long-term goal, having a focused effort will really drive these projects to the next level. Collaborating with the stakeholders early and often is also a key to the successful project. Establishing a good support system internally and externally, technical and managerial support, and then start with a clean sheet. Have an open mind and use everything possible in the toolbox, and then use integrated holistic design processes and incorporate ongoing involvement in the project. So in a summary, the key to successful deep energy retrofits in our books is a well understood and achievable strategies, communication, deliberate goal settings, holistic design, and investing in the efficiency today, we believe prepares our buildings to become resilient grid assets and support goals like net zero energy. And then, as I think I mentioned, grid interactive efficient buildings, energy efficiency coupled with demand flexibility is kind of what we are looking to improve and incorporate into our retrofit projects in the future more. Thank you.
Thank you, Kinga. That's some great examples. And isn't it neat that 10 years, almost to the day, you get to come back and give an update on a very successful program, pushing deep retrofits before many people were talking about deep retrofits. Those who are watching, these are some great references on deep retrofits and the GSA program. You just teased us with a little glimpse of a slide on GEB's grid interactive efficient buildings. Lot of discussion about that. There's a FOA out there for connected communities. There's a new roadmap that was published within the last week or two. A lot of activity going in this particular area. Do you think ESPCs are a viable method to expand the bundle, if you will, to include demand flexibility?
Yes, definitely. And this is something we are working with the Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Lab on. We understand the limitations, and there is risk in how do you guarantee demand savings when you are not the ones switching the switches on and off in the building. So we have several ongoing pilot projects, and partnering with utilities I think is becoming more and more important. So we have ongoing pilot projects using utility energy savings performance contracts. So we have developed an MNV method that satisfies the contract requirements and the ESCO and the utilities requirements. So we definitely think this is a viable solution, and we'll include it in our Phase 5 National Deep Energy Retrofit Program Notice of Opportunity, already language on the grid interactive efficient building. So we are asking ESCOs to evaluate opportunities to reduce our demand and bring cost savings that we think is significant. A recent study showed about 20% cost reduction for the GSA if we were to apply these energy efficiency and demand flexibility measures across our portfolio. So we're not going to let that go.
Great. Well, thank you, Kinga. And now let's turn to our last speaker. Alex Hill is a partner at Dunsky Energy Consulting, where he leads the firm's financing program design and evaluation practice. Through his work, he has led the design of clean energy financing programs valuing over $3 billion US, evaluated programs across the US and Canada, and developed financing strategies for a number of leading jurisdictions. Alex, thanks for joining the panel, and over to you.
Great. Thank you, Clay. And thank you for the introduction. One clarification, I think that's probably 3 billion Canadian dollars, so around $2.5 US. And I'm going to talk about an initiative that we recently designed for the Canadian Canadian Infrastructure Bank in order to support the financing of deep energy retrofits within commercial buildings across Canada. And this is an initiative, I would say, that I think the concept ties in well with the first two presentations, which we're looking more at the strategies of getting into the buildings and the structures for getting the retrofits done. And this initiative is intended to operate at the national or federal level in order to create the flexible capital and the financing that could then feed into those types of initiatives. So I'll describe a little bit about what the design process was and then how the program is functioning itself. So just first to give a bit of an introduction to our team, there was a number of us involved with the design of this program, myself, as well as Patricia Lightburn, Aaron Berg, an associate at Dunsky, and Russell Unger. And of course, we worked with the knowledgeable team of financing experts at the Canada Infrastructure Bank as well to develop this initiative. So the Commercial Building Retrofit Initiative, that's the program I'm going to talk about, is actually part of an overall building retrofit strategy or pair of initiatives that are being supported by the Canada Infrastructure Bank. So in parallel to the Commercial Building Retrofit Initiative, there's also a Public Building Retrofit Initiative that has been launched at the same time. And I think it's pretty evident from the titles. The program we designed was focused on private commercial buildings, and there's a different approach and a different program for public buildings, which have quite different needs and financing structures. So as far as the program, the Commercial Building Retrofit Initiative objectives go, it was really being driven by greenhouse gas savings. And I'll talk a bit about some of the implications of focusing on greenhouse gas savings in designing a financing program as opposed to energy savings in a moment. But that was the driving objective behind establishing this initiative by the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And it's really part of the federal approach to our country's overall greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets in the short and medium and long term. A big part of what drives that too, the objectives were to support market transformation related to how commercial building retrofits get done and get financed across the country. In order to get those deep savings over the long term, it's understood the way the market is currently functioning is not sufficiently supportive. So, it's really looking to, drive retrofits that are going beyond the current industry norm, to look for ways as the program evolves to crowd in private capital. So all of the public capital goes in, should pull with it some private capital, and with time more and more private capital. And then part of the transformation approach too is to establish commercial building retrofits as an asset class to itself. And I think that was touched on a little bit as well by James's approach earlier. And then of course it's the federal government, and they have broader objectives than just greenhouse gases and market transformation, but also economic and social co-benefits such as job creation, reducing energy costs, health and safety, and long-term asset renewal of the building stock. So the first step that we undertook before diving into establishing financing terms was really to work with the team at the Infrastructure Bank to establish what it was to sort of understand, okay, what are the conditions you're ultimately trying to address, and then back those out to each of the different levels of supporting conditions necessary in order to get to that final end goal vision. And when you boil it down, it really came down to the three elements that underpinned the theory of change that the Infrastructure Bank was trying to get at. So the first is, of course, providing attractive financing in the market, and the bank providing that to the programs or the local initiatives that would then provide that to buildings. Reduce investment barriers and drive carbon savings. And so within that, there are different approaches and strategies to try and get that done. So attractive financing, of course, is lower rates and longer terms. Trying to find ways to shift the performance risk and support off-balance sheet. Some of these can be done directly by the federal initiative or the Commercial Building Retrofit Initiative, and some of them have to be done by the implementers who accept the financing and conduct the retrofits themselves. On the reducing the investment barriers, then standardizing the data offer, and really trying to come up with as much of a standardized process. And I think this is where it ties into the asset class development. Is important with time, standardizing the transactions, but also recognizing that the pre-development is quite essential to trying to get these projects identified and get them off the ground. And then to drive the carbon savings themselves, the program ties the financing terms to the depth of savings, and looks at ways to monetize carbon and other special. And across this entire framework, there's an overarching objective of catalyzing innovation. So this was the theoretical framework that drove the program design, and I'll talk more about where we landed in the end with the specific features. So as far as the applicants to the program goes, it's really directed at really two different streams. So one would be building owners. It could be for a single building retrofit owner or multiple, or a portfolio owner. In each case, they need to have a significant enough need to meet the minimum $25 million threshold for accepting. That's the minimum investment size from the infrastructure bank. So in this case, we're probably talking about large portfolio owners or very large single facilities. I could see something like the Empire State Building retrofit project would probably have exceeded $25 million. So that kind of an initiative could apply directly to the fund. But for most buildings, we're talking about smaller initiatives, and those were smaller budgets, and those would pass through the retrofit aggregators. And that's where most of the activity in the program is expected to be. So these would be energy services company or super ESCOs applying to accept the federal financing. There could be other types of new entrants into the energy services market and innovative business models for aggregating retrofits. And then it's also looking at supporting local CPACE administrators with capital across the country, and possibly also utility on-bill financing. As far as the types of buildings that are eligible, it's existing buildings, privately owned, must be in Canada, and they must be a commercial building, so offices, retails, warehouse are examples. It also includes large multi-unit residential buildings, which essentially operate as commercial buildings, even though they're home to many people. And industrial buildings and facilities also included. So you can see there's quite a diverse market with diverse needs, and it's really up to the intermediary who applies to the fund in order to develop the front-end financing offer to those facilities that is best matched to each market segment. One of the key challenges that we faced was coming up with targets. This program is not designed to be a business as usual program. We had at the beginning of this presentation or the session, Clay put out the question, what is a deep energy retrofit? So, in collaboration with the Canada Infrastructure Bank, we arrived at 30% reduction in greenhouse gases is considered to be a deep retrofit. Now, considering that these are working across averages within a portfolio, there is some room for an individual building to be slightly lower as long as the overall portfolio averages out to 30% or higher. And by going much higher than 30%, the applicants can actually receive better terms on the financing that they're offered. So the challenge comes in that, how do you interpret the greenhouse gas savings? Canada is a country where some of the provinces have very low carbon grid, which are largely provided by hydroelectricity, where energy savings deliver, or electricity savings deliver very few greenhouse gases savings. Whereas we have other provinces where the electricity grid is fed primarily with coal or gas-fired generation, where electricity savings generate massive greenhouse gas savings. So in order to put all of these different opportunities on an equal footing, rather than putting the targets on tons of CO2 or on specific energy savings targets, we put it as a percent energy saving target, a percent greenhouse gas saving target, which means that an electrically heated building in a low carbon grid, if it can reduce its electricity by 30%, even though the direct greenhouse gases are quite small from that, it would still represent 30% of the greenhouse gases because there's always a small amount of CO2 associated with all electricity generation across the country. Similarly, a project in another province with very high carbon intensive grid could also reduce its electricity by 30%, also getting significant, also being eligible for the program, but generating much more actual carbon savings. The rationale there is trying to create equity across the country, but it's also recognizing that displacing electricity use in a low carbon grid jurisdiction actually frees up that resource to be sold to another jurisdiction to replace higher carbon generation elsewhere. So I think I've covered most of what's here. The overall, as far as the types of projects that will be financed, is quite broad. It can be energy efficiency, heating decarbonization, on-site renewables and storage, as well as, it could be microgrid. There's a whole lot of different types of projects that really there was not much emphasis placed on the specific technologies or approaches to achieving those greenhouse gas savings, but more taking an outcomes-based approach to the program design and letting the market and the industry innovate what are the best ways to get that done. So as far as the structure of the investment itself, as I said, it's a minimum threshold of $25 million for CIB's investment. And this would work through, for any investment, there needs to be 20% equity applied into the investment pool from a private source. So this is the crowding into private capital. And with time, ideally, that becomes larger. That's a minimum. It could be larger than the 20%. And in a way, it works a bit like the way that a home mortgage would work, where the homeowner puts up the first 5 or 20%, and then the bank puts up the remaining 80%. So in this case, if there are any losses within the fund, they would come primarily out of the portion first. It protects the Canada Infrastructure Bank from its long-term risk from that leveraging ratio. The way that the financing pool is established, once you're approved for financing, the applicants have 5 years to pull on what's called a non-revolving line of credit, meaning they have access to the $25 million or more. They can pull on it as soon as projects are approved, and then they have 25 years to pay back the entire fund amount. This allows them to have the flexibility of not paying interest down on money until there's an actual project to get it done, and it gives them also flexibility about determining the repayment terms and structure against other investors within the investment pools that are accessing the fund. I'll go pretty quickly because I think we only have a few minutes left. So
yes, we only have 3 minutes left to the whole session.
Okay, so I can probably wrap up pretty much with this slide here. So the applicants follow 4 steps in order to get access to the money. First is an intent to apply to make sure that they're an appropriate applicant. Then there's the financial due diligence applied to their overall transaction and the model that they're applying for. And then once the financial due diligence is established and the revolving line of credit or non-revolving line of credit is established, then the technical due diligence on individual projects allows them to access those funds. And in this part of the process, we're applying the investor confidence project protocols in order to achieve that, and that's part of the market transformation objective. And then finally, there's disbursements and reporting and repayment over time. I think that covers most of the key elements. I could get into more detail on how the different due diligence works, but I'm happy to wrap up there if we're nearing the end, Clay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Really interesting history and development of a very effective model. What I'd like to do is there are questions. I've been writing them down in the question box, and we're going to be addressing those in the Zoom breakout session. So please join us at the Zoom breakout session. But I'd like to ask all of the speakers to come on for one last lightning round question. Okay, and that is, how do we make this self-sufficient? If you look at the IEA Net Zero Roadmap, which was published last week, it's a roadmap for the energy sector to get to zero carbon emissions by 2050. Most ambitious roadmap ever developed. Buildings are front and center in that work. Basically, demand globally for energy in buildings is going to go up 29% by 2030. So we need a 51% reduction in energy use from electrification, energy efficiency, behavior, and digitalization. 20% of existing buildings will have to go through a deep energy retrofit by 2030, defined as being zero carbon ready. As soon as the grid gets greener, the buildings get greener, 50% by 2040. And finally, the current rate of renovation is less than 1% per year. We need to get to at least 2.5% renovation rate per year in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So let's go in the same speaking order. James, how can we leverage the things we've learned in the last decade and make it irreversible and self-funding, self-sufficient in the next decade? Short answer, please.
Yeah, my short answer would be fees for building owner based on the effectiveness of proven health interventions on sleep, asthma, diabetes, and so forth, so that they're getting health revenues as a funding stream. That their health is expensive, people pay a lot of money for it, and that small intervention fee to building owners will give them sufficient incentive.
Great. Monetize all the benefits of these buildings. Great answer. Kinga, how about you?
You took my answer, but that's a good answer. So I'm turning to the GSA. We know how to do it. We need to staff up to be able to support these projects. Using energy savings performance contracts, even with the lack of funding, has really proven to be a great tool, great financing mechanism. So we just need to, I always say, deep retrofits business as usual. So it's not harder, it's not impossible. We have methods to do it. We just need to use all our tools.
Great. And finally, over to you, Alex.
Sure. So I think the first thing I would say is prove the market, show that the deep energy savings can be done in a profitable way, and the capital will show up. And then second, standardize and make it as easy to get done as possible. Get rid of the friction in contracting and project development. That'll help with the first item.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks to our speakers for a very informative panel. Please now join us in the Zoom room. The Zoom discussion rooms are available. You can click on the Zoom widget on the bottom menu, or click on the Zoom link at the Engagement Hub. We hope to see you all there. We have some great questions queued up that we're anxious to answer. Take care, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. See you there.
Thank you.